self-reg is it's my passion. I moved across the country in 2014, I guess 2015, to run Stuart's organization. So I literally moved here to do that because I just believe in the work so much. And I definitely discovered Self-Reg and Stuart Shanker through my work as an educator. But where it's made the biggest difference in my life, if I had to, it's hard to compete because it really is, as a parent, and who I am as a mom, and who I am as a human being and my own well-being as well. And so it's a real big pleasure to be speaking with all of you this evening. So I'm just going to pull up my slides here. Now, I do want to tell you that the goal of this evening, so during part one, so if you were not here last time, go back and see part one and go and check in on it. I will be applying some of the things I talked about in part one more than spending any deep time going into it. And I went through a little bit more of the science, but there's lots that you can go back on, and don't feel like you need to exit because this is going to, because you've missed something and you can't dive in, because it's designed very much to focus on, okay, how do we actually, what are some of the ways that we apply this? What does it actually look like, feel like? What are some strategies? We got to be careful of the word strategy, because sometimes we're looking for a quick strategy, and really this isn't a program. It's a framework and a way of thinking, a way of being, and it really is about playing the long game, but it also has some very immediate things that you can do as well. So I'm trying to touch on some of those, but I just wanted you to see what we talked about a little bit last time. So we definitely had a look at what stress is. And the big key there, the big thing to remember is it's not just the idea of stress. It's not just the cognitive stress. It is not just, what we talk about in mainstream culture. It is really about the effect of stress on brains and bodies, okay, and on physiology and brains and how we function, and what we feel like in the day, and all kinds of things. And it's very connected to behavior. It's not the enemy, and it's really part of being a human being. You cannot remove it from that equation, but it's too much stress. And when we're seeing the signs of it, we're seeing the signs of it coming out in the behaviors and some of the things that we're dealing with. And it can be really deceptive because, sometimes we'll say, oh, things were so much harder when I was a kid, right? And we're not realizing that while some of that in some senses might be true, in terms of how the stress actually works on the physiology, on the body, all kinds of things are working on kids and teens and us. And it's not just in the last couple of years. There's things that have been going on. The decade of the smartphone, for example, has really affected it. So I just want you to, right now, as an example, to just think about stress. I just want you to pick up, I'm picking up a cup, okay? And you can pick up, if you have a water bottle or anything nearby you, and just hold it and notice, notice the weight, notice whatever it is you feel about it. Mine is empty because I would spill it. But what I want you to think about is that weight is actually a stressor. It's sending cues. So the body is doing all kinds of things beneath conscious awareness. If you hold it for 10 minutes, it's going to feel heavier because it's a perceptive change, but it is actually involved with all of the stressors that are going on. So I might have stressors when I was nervous about dropping this. I might have the biological stressor of the weight of it. So we begin to think about stress in really different ways. Okay, so we'll look at a few examples. Last time I talked about gravity. We take it for granted. Gravity is a stressor. The very fact that you can consume, if you look at let's say the average person is 2,000 calories a day, is what they'll consume if you sat still and did absolutely nothing. Right? That's because the body is consuming energy, right, in the form of glucose and others, but mainly glucose, just to get us through the day. So stressors are important for us because the stress load on so many of us is through the roof right now. And the big gap is not just reducing the stress. We have to talk about that. And it's not bubble wrapping, it's the opposite. But reducing the stress that we can, but we're not getting to restoration. Is one of the biggest ongoing challenges for the long game. We are not getting into these restorative states. And that's a big piece of it. So then we talked about the 5 domains of stress, which you can see there. These are from Stuart: the biological, the emotion, cognitive, social, and pro-social. I'll be using that. I'll be using all these a little bit today, but all you need to know there is that there's a whole lot of different stressors. This came from work Stuart did when he had the MEHRIT Centre at York University. But there are all kinds of stressors in all kinds of different domains, and we'll play with that, realizing it's not just one. We talked about the triune metaphor, which is that image you're seeing of the brain. And it's a metaphor. Neuroscientists will tell you the brain is way more complex. The brain is way more complex. There's new science coming out that is suggesting some of the things that we thought about the brain, and even this model are are inaccurate or maybe need more research. But it's not the idea of like the brain being baked like a cake with 3 layers. It's what's really relevant to us about the triune metaphor and using it as a metaphor for the brain. 2 things. One, I have to say that I find it so helpful that I can work as something I've used with kids or adults, but I have kids to help them understand, what just happened. A kid has a total meltdown in some kind of way, and having them realize, they flipped their lid, they just went red brain, is a real gift, because we can work on that. We can work on getting back. We're getting back to a state of balance a little bit. And really trying to explain anything more really complex. For me, that's my understanding of the brain. I learn as much as I can, but it helps me understand. I think about which state I'm in. And a big one for self-reg is realizing that in survival states, we recruit different areas, subcortical areas of our brain. And so why that matters, because we tend to think everything is needing to make a better decision, or they should have made better choices. Or I was just down in Lakehead University last week for looking at well-being, part of a conference on well-being and mental health in university students, and they get lots of sessions on graphic organizers and time management, and that's all fine. It has a place. But what happens, when that's just not available to you? And we might think, oh, but everything's a choice. Yeah, for me, I often, the one I go to is, because I've used food. Food is sort of, food is one that I have used, a stress eater, I guess, is a good way to say it. And, I'll have all the willpower in the world. I've gotten way healthier about it, thanks to Self-Reg over the years. I have a much better relationship with food and with myself around it. But it's really that, you have all the willpower in the world, and then you're going through the drive-through for the 3rd time on at 9 o'clock at night. Where did it go? Is that because you didn't have enough willpower? You didn't make a good choice? No, we're so hard on ourselves, and we're thinking it is something around character or will or self-control, when there are other things active in the brain and body, and we need to honor and respect those. Recognize them for what they are and honor them. And that's not going easy on it. That's part of the solution, because we're not adding more stress by guilting. And it's really relevant to kids, honestly, because if we're, any of you, I'm not sure what ages the various kids are. So I have done this. Some of the little videos I've intentionally chosen to show the concepts. So we'll try to apply it to infants and toddlers, because they're just so fun to see the concept. But then we're really thinking of it in any of those age groups. Teenagers, I have a teenager myself, right? So it really is to begin to think, okay, what's going to actually work? And because I'm trying to move my kiddo along to be an independent adult who's still going to need people her whole life, but to have that confidence and well-being. And there's mental health stuff too, and how do I do that? Well, it's not with more of the the wagging the finger and the self-control and the timeouts and the naughty chairs and the name on the boards and the sticker charts and all of these approaches, carrot and a stick approaches to behavior. They really don't if they work for a short term, and maybe they work because a child is afraid, but that's compliance out of fear. That's not out of doing what they want to do and doing the right thing because they want to make the right choices. And it's really, there's so much science that's really blown that stuff out of the water. And it's really, that's what this work is about, taking the science and thinking about how we can use it in our parenting and our educating, in taking care of ourselves and all of these things. So we talked a bit about the triune metaphor. So stress affects the brain. Stress comes in 5 domains. There's all kinds of stressors all the time. And it changes the states of the brain. It causes a cascade of effects. The chart that you see that has multiple colors, that's the Thayer matrix. By the way, there's a lot here. If you're feeling like, this is my only science slide, I just wanted to give you an anchor. But you can go, we have lots of courses where they, the ECD course, for example, it's about 3 months long. So where you can go in depth if you really want to learn more. There's books, there's all stuff on YouTube. We have lots of things. But the Thayer matrix is important because we begin to think about, okay, stress has its impact and cumulative stress over time. And some of you on here are the people that are taking care of absolutely everybody else. You're working, you're taking care of the kids, you're taking, your mother-in-law and everyone taking care and volunteering, doing all these sorts of things. And there's very little left for you at the end of the day. And that happens to many of us. And realizing when we begin to it really begins to take its wear and tear on us. So this is just, it's a matrix that is tied to physiology. It is really saying that the brain and body go through different states of energy. So think of high energy when you feel good, not hyperactivity. I have the energy, this is great, and low energy, which isn't always bad. If you're tired, low energy is a good thing. And then another continuum of tension. So, low, no tension is lovely for an afternoon stroll. I have tension right now. You'd want me to have tension, right? If you were to look at my muscles and things, there would be tension there because I'm speaking and I care and I want to do a good job and give you something meaningful. But if I stay in that state all day long of tension, what begins to happen is my energy completely bottoms out, and that's what's happening to so many, right? Or we're getting the jolt drinks or whatever. So it's a really big issue for many of our teens, for example. So that this is what this matrix is about. It's a tool. It's kind of a neat tool. I use it all the time, just to kind of think which of these quadrants am I in right now? And my biggest challenge is not getting enough time on the low tension side. We definitely emphasize that there is a difference between self-control and self-regulation. And if you are new here tonight and your view of those was the same, we talked last time about how there are different definitions. So there's like almost 500, I think, in the literature of different definitions: social emotional learning or self-regulated learning, executive function, all kinds of different ones that are different from the one we use, which is the original, and it is the psychophysiological. So the brain body, how stress operates on the brain and body. It's the game changer, because if I'm trying to get a kid to control an emotional meltdown, or a teenager to go to school, I'm hearing this all the time, or, or someone to stop crying, we'll talk about that, or, someone to take responsibility or whatever, clean up their room, stop fighting with your sister. And I'm looking at it as self-control. I'm assuming, okay, they're using the blue brain and they could have made a different choice. And they just need to choose better, and that will solve all of this. And it's a self-regulation problem. Dysregulated stress response system. It's like, I like the Fitbit of the future, thinking about this whirlwind, this cascade of things going on in the brain and body under excessive stress. And there's lots of things that can add to that. So self-regulation is also compassionate. We realize we focus on, okay, I'm going to work on getting back. Just think of it as balance. It's homeostasis in a whole bunch of systems. But we're really thinking about it in a different way. And yes, a few of them we can choose. Yes, a few of the self-regulation systems we can choose. Breath is one. I can choose to regulate myself with a little bit of breath, but most of them go on beneath conscious awareness. Right now, my systems are keeping me at a certain temperature. They're looking, things are monitoring blood glucose levels, all of those kinds of things, right, are happening. And they're real and they have impact and they show up. It's like they create a platform for behavior. It's really, really, really key, especially when you combine it with our knowledge of child development. And, when we think what some of the things we're expecting of 3-year-olds are not even developmentally able, right? So they're still in development. When we combine those two, they really match. And then the on the end is self-reg. So that is it's 5 practices. They are not, for me, I'm not a clinician. I'm an educator, and so I use them as practices. But they're 5 R's. We reframe behavior, recognize and reduce the stressors that we can. We reflect, and it's about stress awareness. So noticing like a sneeze coming on, what's going on in our brain and body, and we focus on restoration. It's a really, really huge key. So that's where we went last time. Now, I want to just emphasize again that self-reg and self-regulation isn't the root of everything at all. But because we're talking about excessive stress, it is related to just about anything that is a challenge. Okay, so any challenging behaviors, and I'm a big believer at the universal level, not targeted. There's a place for that, and we need those. But what are we doing at the universal level? What are we doing for every kid, for every family? If you're in this classroom or the early childhood, what are we doing at the center? And there's an awful lot that we can realize that stress, too much stress and no resources, internal or external, to know how to manage those is part of what's going on. So it can mimic, we think somebody is really struggling to learn to read, or is struggling to learn whatever progress in math, or to in something in a school aged area, and without realizing the impact of excessive stress on working memory. That alone, if we can lighten the excessive stress, it can make a huge difference. You've all had a moment when you tried to learn something, and or I have had for sure, where it just wouldn't stick. And you feel like, oh, I'm not very, you kind of feel like you're not very smart or something. And like, I just can't keep this in my head. Well, there's lots of reasons that can happen, but stress is part of, it's part of the cognitive load. It's part of what's going on. So it's the same, any of you fighting with your children around homework in the evenings, for example. And that's a whole nother webinar. But let's just say you get it and you're trying to support kids to do it, and they're having meltdowns every single time. It's actually also at the end of the day, batteries are finite. Maybe they don't completely understand what they need to do. They've been had all the empathy. You've had all the empathy for everybody all day long, but your battery is worn down, right? So all of those things can add to these chaos. Obesity, the research on the root causes of obesity, we got to bust the myth that's a behavior choice and poor choices, because the science doesn't back that up. There's a whole lot more, and there's all kinds of blogs on this, these various areas. Oppositional defiance disorder. When I worked in the Northwest Territories, every kid that went down south, they called Edmonton down south, if you'll believe it or not, but went out to have assessments, came back with, they always came back with several diagnoses, but they always came back with an ODD diagnosis. And, I'm not a clinician, so I can't say that, it's not my place to really judge whether that's so or not. But there's something fishy about that for me, and I'm not criticizing the medical profession, but realizing you're taking kids from a remote community out of their communities. Many of them had never been on a plane before, into this place with doctors and white coats everywhere. And there's some of the cultural way of a little bit of backtalk. I don't know how else to say that, but yeah, I'm not doing that, right? And I lived there for 7 years. The kids were wonderful, But how could you misinterpret that and realize that that is actually me keeping you all at bay because this is way too much for me? And so beginning to realize the factors of stress. I have a diagnosis of ADD, and it's ADD I got when I was, a teenager, and I've struggled with, depression too in my life. And I can assure you that that stress is a factor in all of those things. So we just need to honor it for what it is. Now, I want to really focus on this idea tonight of, what we can do as adults and caregivers and educators and parents. So keep in mind, this is the science definition, the original definition, the psychophysiological about how we, so the brain body, manages stress, how much energy we expend. That's glucose primarily, but there's, we also tap into our fat, and there's the chemicals of stress that help out, and how well we recover. So really remember that, how well we recover, because so often when we're here, and I'm going to invite you very soon, I think in just a couple more slides, so you can do it sooner if you like, to add into the Q&A some questions that you would like us to unpack, some focus, anything that you have that's a burning question. It would be great to know it on the front end. I have stuff prepared of where I can go on my own, but it would be so much nicer to be infused with some of your questions really, really early on. So we really have to remember that the word self-reg is deceiving, because it sounds like it's all within the person. They're all on their own. A kid will do fine. It may be in one community and then move the children to another community, and things, they really struggle. The university students, so you can think of this as for those of you with older kids, many of them go away. They were fine in their home communities, thriving, and all of a sudden they're struggling. Your circle of support has disappeared. Kids in the foster care system. I mean, these circles of support that are there, and then all of a sudden the child is moved. Things can change on us. So we need to really remember that this is never just within the child. I work in a lot of early childhood centers and a lot of schools. And one of the very first things, and honor the people who do the work. It's been a really hard time, and it's a really important work. And it's hard because we're hearing, things are tougher everywhere. That's what I'm hearing everywhere. Not a day goes by someone doesn't have a conversation with me about, the younger children, the 2 and 3-year-olds really challenged, and 4-year-olds, and then the 6-year-olds, and then everywhere. And it is COVID related, but we were challenged before COVID too. So we need to realize there's more than just recovering from that and all the shifts. I'm really allergic to the idea of learning loss. I think it's okay. We have to confront it and face it. But we also, it's that deficit mindset, and really looking at where we're at, but so many struggles. And then we've got children. Imagine being a child in a new early childhood center, and English, you don't know much English, and you have been moved, you've come from another country. Maybe you've come from as a refugee, and what you've experienced in the last year or two, we can't even imagine. And then you're put into this center with all kinds of rules, all kinds of, looks completely different to anything and mom, dad, or grandma, or whoever, drops you off. And just imagine what that does to a stress system, a brain and body that is designed, its number one priority, the brain's number one priority is to keep you alive, survival. Once that is, and there's all kinds of perceptors. There's called neuroception, where it's always scanning for for threat and safety. All kinds of other things can happen, can be planned and so on actively. But when you're in a survival state, no, because the brain body is keeping you safe. Priority number one. So just imagine what that's like, right? And we don't realize that there are things to work on with the kids, for sure. But there are also things that we adults need to work on and can work on, and the things that we can do. We also have to be cautious of the words, because sometimes we fall into talk. I do, as much as you. I do for sure. But when? That's the key. In the heat of a moment, when you're, someone's in a red brain, state, or a gray brain shutdown, a collapse, it's not the moment, and no one's can even hear things. So we really want to think about our role as co-regulators. So, what happens when a storm comes up, right? So you're trying to take risks. You want kids to have independence. We want to encourage, and as much as possible, really, it's not bubble wrapping, it's encouraging, keeping kids safe. Yeah, it's not like total free for all, but encouraging as much independence as possible, but also recognizing when it's outside of their window of tolerance. And you're seeing that through their behavior, it's more than they can handle. So we co-regulate. How do we, it's not just lend our calm, it's lend our hope, it's lend our energy, it's lend our love, it's about being with. And it's such an anchor, and it's particularly hard with with kids as they get older. Great, those of you that have teens or tweens that maybe are telling you mean things, and they're nothing to do with you, and we get the feeling that they don't they don't they don't want us. They'll tell you they hate you. You can have things like that, or we get this myth that you're supposed to leave them completely independent. Still be engaged. It really makes a difference. And showing up every day. We have lots of young adults that tell us about that person that stuck with them no matter what, even then when they were unbearable. That really mattered. Their mom, their dad, their whoever that was, right? So it's really about showing up, realizing that when somebody yells at you, your kid yells at you, they don't hate you, they need you. They're in a stress response and they have no idea what to do about it. And here's the thing: if we jump in and yell, and we do that, I know all this stuff and I do it. It still happens to me that I get frustrated or whatever, because I'm human and we're human. But the more we learn and the more we begin to notice that, the more it changes, because how we respond is what matters. And this is not saying, oh, no problem, you're just overstressed, you've got so much on your back, no problem. I understand that you're never going to get out of bed, or that you're through a rock, or that you did whatever. It's like, no, let's take the throwing the rock. No, that's not okay. That's not, you hurt someone else. That's not what we do, but that's not who you are. They need you to be their biggest champion. They really do, especially the kids that are struggling the most. So remember that self-regulation, so learning to manage our energy and tension, realizing when I need to say no to a social thing, or when I need to just take a few minutes. I take timeouts for me. No, I don't do that. I've never did that. I never wanted to separate, but I did take them for me. That's me self-regulating. That's me realizing, okay, what do I need in this particular moment? What do I need to stay in enough balance to deal with the things I need to deal with? I always get a big cup of tea for these, because it just is a bit anchoring for me. So we develop self-regulation through co-regulation. That is other people. It's feeling the synchrony with someone else, that you're feeling felt. It's not someone else trying to manage your behavior. It's somebody that you feel felt, you feel understood. We talk about it as lending calm, but it's also, your view of the child, your view of your kids, your view of your students, for teachers. It's all of those things, helping them see what's possible and beyond. Every kid wants to do well, every single one of them. And I know you've got examples and you're like, yeah, no, they do. They're struggling, and the brain is brilliant at survival mechanisms that will close out, will close off. And I can assure you, they'd love to be thriving. So I choose to see the best. I try my best to see the best. And so that's part of co-regulation. But it's not just, oh, you came into the life as an infant and you needed to have everything regulated for you. By that, I mean temperature and feeding and when to sleep and when you needed, soothing, to co-regulating, helping you around 3 years old. You start to see some of these signs, helping you manage and recognize when you need to go, maybe, curl up with a stuffy or whatever, to then you're doing it all yourself. We need it across the lifespan. Teenagers do it for each other, right? They really shift to focusing on each other. With seniors, there was, co-regulations across the lifespan. And you go through a hard time. When I lost my mom, a lot of people in my circle, she lived here with me, and I just took it really hard. It was hard. And and I had to keep going. I was everything to everybody and running a bit, all kinds of things. And people co-regulated. People lifted up me just enough, lifted up the slack, did what they could to lighten my load, and it made a really big difference. So this is how we learn it. Remember, kids are watching you. I love this. I've got a bunch of cute little clips. They're all infants and toddlers, but we'll talk about some of the ideas. So. I love it. But I want you to notice, though, it's clearly that it is dad affecting his son, like he's trying to model dad. But watch also that, I'm talking to you about energy and tension. Watch the high energy, but also the tension as they're watching whatever sport they're watching, right? So just watch for a sec here. Look at the tension, the full focus. Right? So it's not all about finding calming corners, and like I like the language. I'm more moving towards the language of cozy corners, because sometimes the calming has been misused and people get told they got to go there and that kind of thing. And it's actually it should be a self-chosen. It takes time. These things take layers and you build over time, but beginning to recognize when you're getting dysregulated, like a sneeze coming on, and having a couple of options that you can do in that particular moment. That's part of it with children. So this is what self-reg is. It's a process for understanding stress and managing energy and tension. This develops naturally. It's not, you're saying that if you're thinking to yourself, they're not ready for it. It is happening, whether you teach anything about it or work on your co-regulation or not. When a kid takes off out the door and runs, or completely shuts down, or yells and storms away, or any of those things, believe it or not, that is a form of self-regulation. It's being driven from lower parts of the brain. It's unhealthy, it's maladaptive, it causes more problems. But from the brain's perspective of survival, it dealt with the stress. So I yell at you, I get to be alone, which is what I need. Right? So it's really interesting. And it's so complex when you begin to learn more and more about all of these ways that we do maladaptive self-regulation. But it's already happening. So what our work is helping for the kids and people and humans that need it, to learn a little bit more about the science that I find helpful, because it realizes it's not just compassion and nice ideas, and to begin to practice and develop some skills and strategies. So I'd love you to answer this question for me. You don't have to, but I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to give you a moment, and I'm going to look in the Q&A and see what I find in there. Because it will shape how we spend the next half an hour or so. Because I have things that I can do, but I'd also like to see if there's something in particular you'd like me to answer or focus on, or ages or anything at all. So what I'm going to do for the folks that have asked some of those questions is I'm going to tie your question directly to what I've presented. Okay, so the very first thing that we do in everything to do with self-reg, so when you're asking for the strategies, and it's a very good question. You're saying, okay, I believe, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Right? And a big part of it it's hard. I wish there was the simple quick fix strategies. I've got 3 sides of strategies I'll show you that can all make a difference. But this is a long game. Some of the things we're dealing with have come over a long period of time, and this is not a program. So there's no colored cards or or quick checklists or anything like that to guide. There is lots of content like that you can apply, but the most important thing is you. You are the strategy, and when you begin to use the 5 practices of self-reg, even if you just start with a few. it really begins to, you'll begin asking different questions. So I'm going to use this one to answer one of the questions in here. So the very first practice or step, as Stuart calls it, is reframe the behavior. So this is really us saying, okay, if this isn't all just misbehavior, if it's a misbehavior, it's intentional, it's a chosen, I did it on purpose, right? And even though many of us don't necessarily believe that about all of the behaviors we see, we tend to punish and parent and discipline as if everything is a choice, and it just isn't. It really isn't. And you know, and we're really privileging the kids that are more regulated, and they tend to be the kids that have had less knocks in life, have less of the ACEs, the early, the adverse early childhood experiences. It really does. It's, I wish if you're teachers, I wish you classes with lots of kids like that, but we really need to think about equity. We need to think about inclusion. And there's a lot we can do just by being present ourselves. So the most important one of all the steps is this one: reframe the behavior. If we're convinced that the kid is bad, could have chosen better, is just doing this to drive me crazy, then you're not going to get very far. And so be kind to yourself. If you have that, stay with it. I would suggest read some science. So we reframe misbehavior as stress behavior. And so it really shifts things from being on purpose to being caused by stress. So that's tricky, because you're trying to say, if you're assuming, that means, oh, well, they're not responsible for their behavior. Yeah, they are. They're still accountable for their behavior. And actually expectations and accountabilities are actually help kids feel safe. It actually reduces, it's part of it. It's not a stressor if it's done with love, and it's done with learning that the things that we do, they do have repercussions, right? So you make a mess, you clean it up is a really interesting one, but it's really starting before we get to any of that, realizing that they're not trying to give us a hard time. This is they're having a hard time, right? And there's something more going on. So it's caused by stress. It's on a platform of a total stress response state. Those moments when they're not their best selves because their brain and body's in survival, on overload. And we do what we can to co-regulate, lend calm in the moment and over time. So I'm going to take an example here. Oh, let's just watch the infant.
Dramatic.
So, and you hear mom saying dramatic. So we look at that, you might say it's cute because it's a 2-year-old, but when we see the 12-year-old version of that, what do we say, right? And frustration is a stressor. It actually gobbles glucose. It's actually gobbling glucose. There would be motor control issues there, being, developmental, being able to get the sock on, can't get it on, right? So there's all kinds of stressors going on there. That is not a bad kid. That's a kid who struggled in the moment and who needs soothing, right? And you try it again the next day or whenever he tries it again. So let me take one of these examples and that I've got from the various cues, and let's apply it here and see if we can reframe. Okay, my son gets complaints everywhere we go, all of his classes, activities, and school, so everywhere. So I'm assuming, the very first thing I hear is that's hard on parents, right? So first of all, hear that, what that feels like as being the parent who's all you ever hear is there's something wrong with your son. He tends to solve his problem with pushing and punching, and he doesn't listen unless I raise my voice. But I really want to stop yelling at him, as I think it makes it worse that he learns from me. So thank you to the person that put that forward in the Q&A. It takes a lot of vulnerability to admit I yell at my kid because I don't know what else to do. Okay. And so the one thing I will say, some of these that are in here, some of them might be very, some of them are more extreme than others, I guess. And I'm not a clinician, and none of what I'm suggesting replaces you referring, getting clinical support, or any of those sorts of things. And if that's been advised to you, you really should do that. Get all the supports that you can. What I'm talking about is, okay, what else can we do at the universal level? Because there's no way, I don't believe, in schools or early childhood or anywhere that we can say that it's just a specialist that's going to come in and figure this out. When we're the one that spends all the time, this is a parenting question, but it's the same. The universal level really matters. And thank you for being vulnerable. So I also think that that you are that this is so what you're describing. So he's 6, and it sounds like a bigger. It does sound like you need some support, and I hope you have a lot of support. So what I would suggest on my end is that from a self-reg parenting perspective is reframing this, okay, and saying to yourself, I don't know all the facts, so I'm just doing a little bit that I can, but I start by saying, I'm going to assume that my kid is a good kid and he's struggling. And yes, he's doing things everywhere he goes that are not okay. And I don't want him to keep doing. But in him is the potential for empathy, the potential for learning, the potential for being able to go places and not get in trouble all the time. So you have to believe that he's doing the best he can. And some of these are learned, right? So it's the very first thing. So he's not, punching and yelling and things. He's not going in there and saying, I'm going to punch that kid. In a way, it happens to him. Okay, so do hear that I'm not saying no accountability. It's still not okay. And that's a very important message. But help him see that there is more within him. And I would begin, for me on this one, I would really begin looking at, so once I reframed the behavior, then I would begin looking at the 5 domains of stress. So you have to know that if you've got extreme behaviors like this, but it's also not just your son, it's you as well, because you're saying, I'm yelling, I don't know what else to do, it's the only thing that works, that there's a lot of stress on everybody in the family. So what you do is you can begin by thinking, okay, if I accept that to be true, and I know that this is going to take some time, and I know I might need specialists and all those things, let me start by where I can reduce stress. So, what are the things that are adding, even in my own home, right? What are some of the things that I can do to dial down the stress? Putting phones away when it's time to, get ready for school in the morning. You'd be surprised is a big, putting your phone away, right? So it's down. How you begin the day, what the environment works. This isn't about spending money, and it's not about necessarily having a Martha Stewart house. I don't have one. I struggle. I've got the best it's been in my life, but I've struggled with that my whole life stuff. And but really thinking, okay, the smells, the light. What can I do around the strong emotions? So he gets really upset when he doesn't get his way. We instantly think spoiled, but the science doesn't line up with spoiled. It's the stress of the disappointment or the frustration, and he has no way to handle it. So you're trying to lend calm. So you're soothing. Just think about what you would do for a young child, right? So how can you soothe? I don't know if your child will let you hold them or lie still or hug or just be with in some kind of way. It's often not words. So that's a piece of it. But looking at all of the things that you can do to help dial down stress, really looking for the hidden ones. There's some you can't change. He needs to go to school, right? He needs to whatever. He needs to do some chores at home, these sorts of things. But what are some of the ones that I can dial down for him a little bit? And if you can have him feel that felt sense, it can make a big difference. So that's one of the things that I would do. I would also suggest doing these for yourself as well. We'll talk strategies in the bio domain in a minute. So I don't know if your 6-year-old has any of this, but it is, someone else asked me here about social media. So I'm going to keep going with both. So the 6-year-old scenario, okay, and Someone asking about social media. So this applies to all technology. Just the science is important because it helps us remember, oh, this is not just a choice. Super stimulants, they operate on the brain and affect opioid receptors and dopamine receptors. And screens, social media, junk food, the monster drinks, all of these excess of sugar activate like that, and they give us this jolt of it feels like it's energy. We feel better and then we feel worse, and it's causing a spiral for many young people, and many adults too. Like look at what happens here. So you can tend to be drawn when we're overstressed. So it's literally adding to that. So if gaming, for example, is part of what the 6-year-old, we could begin to think about that. And that's not cold turkey. That's not no computers, no phones. That ship has sailed. We have to figure out how to work with it. Mentoring, definitely boundaries, but mentoring is a big part of it over time. So in terms of social media, is it affecting? So I'm on to the next question, and I'll come back to the 6-year-old every chance I get. But the social media is a problem in a whole lot of ways. There is also, we don't want to demonize it, because there are also certain populations that it's made a huge difference for. So the actually autistic community, which is a really neat community to follow on anywhere you are on social media. If you want to learn lived experience, social media has made a really big difference. It has done a terrible harm to teenage girls in so many ways, right? So the image of what we're supposed to look like and so on. So it's not good or bad. It is more worrisome for me. As much as I'm saying there are good things, there are worries for it. As a parenting issue, protecting, I really think it's boundaries. I put, this is what I do personally as a parent. So just so you know, I've tried all kinds of different things, and I know that too much technology is a problem. So if you've got a kid gaming, Stuart always says that, again, we're not trying to demonize that. It does help some people. What we're worried about is what they're not doing when they're doing that. So Stuart Shanker talks about the example of, if you can ask the child to come off, you might have to ask twice, but they come off and then they engage, and that's probably an okay amount. But if you can't, if you're thinking they're calm when they're on these games or on social media, and they're not, they're the part of their brain that it's definitely not the restorative part of the brain. It can be very activated. Some of these violent games can activate the brain, and they have a look at it. It's still activated at 4 a.m. And no wonder kids are waking up without feeling really rested, right? So it's really boundaries and support. I do have some parent controls, and my daughter is 15. So and sometimes I take them away, and sometimes I bring them back, and she's does pretty well. But I always, the way I've done it since she's been little, told her that I would look, because I was trained in digital citizenship, and also had a personal friend of a story that always stayed with me, that I told her from the time she was little, I would respect her privacy, but it was important. My job was to keep her safe. And so occasionally I have, and looked at it, and occasionally I do have some parent controls on. It shuts down at 11:15, which you might think is really late. Lots of her friends have it like 3 a.m. So it just never stops. So I put some boundaries on it, but the real work is in the mentoring and the conversations. Young people get really upset, worked up, if they realize they're being manipulated. There's a lawsuit against one of the big video games that they know. I mean, they have this same neuroscience they're using to hook kids, right? So it really is helpful to help them realize what's happening. And again, with me, my language with my own parenting is always, the answer is no. I can say no and be okay with it if I believe it's the right thing, but I always do it with love. I know it's hard for you. I'm doing this because I think, I value your sleep, and so it's a tricky one. So Yes, social media is a problem. It's not completely demonizing it, but really, managing it and being active. If you're a parent that has never looked at anything your kids have done, don't go home tonight and say, "Hey, Susan said I should look at your phone." You have to build that up over time. But I would suggest not doing it in kind of covert ways, which is what some parents do. Being really open and just saying, my role is that you're happy, healthy, and safe, and it has to be with love. And if they screw stuff up, then it's still with love. And it is this message too that it's not all choice. It's hooking kids. There's really a lot to be concerned about. Yeah. And having said that, I'm online a lot. So again, I use it in my life. So I'm not sure if that's helpful or frustrating for anyone. So here are a few strategies you can try. So this would really be helpful for the parent with the 6-year-old boy. And I want you to know that no one of these is going to change everything, right? And some of them might be a stressor for you, then don't do that. If decluttering is like, don't start there. What can you do? So anything you can do to get kids outside, anything that you can do to get some movement in and exercise. And I know it's overwhelming when you hear what kids should be doing, and we're like, I can't even get my kid off the couch, right? What can you do, and how can you build it in? If there's notice, like I talk a lot about real food. Yeah, and I do it I guess I use humor some, but it's funny, the messages begin to land. It's like, I don't eat neon orange stuff, right? I say, but I also can't control everything. I really need my daughter to be able to make some. She's going to do all these things on her own without me. So I'm at the phase where I have a few. She's 15. She's almost 15 and a half. Has her first job, so so I have some boundaries, and they're not that's just it. And she pushes them, and I get calls from the school, so it's not there's been some stuff for sure. So and I was the lost teenager myself. I dropped out a couple of times, so it's not that this is the perfect family at all. But there are some boundaries, and then there's a whole lot of power and trying to trust and giving chances, and they mess up. It's like, well, okay, we start again, right? So less screen time, absolutely, and especially guarding the screen time. Anything you can do to influence the screen time before bed, 2 hours at least. And I know that's hard. Get phone out of your own room. It can make a really big difference, or at least turn it off. They have research that shows that our brain knows when it actually, they can see the reactions in the brain when the phone is in your pocket, even when it's off. Think about that. So it really is something that's taking away from our restoration. So using the breath, you be careful around breathing. If you're going to be whole group breathing, some of you would love it, some of you would hate it. I like the idea of different kinds of breaths, and then letting people choose what works for them. And the big thing about the breath is realizing, if you all take an inhale with me now, so we'll just inhale and then exhale. And you can make those sighs. And I get silly. I do, Luke, I am your father. I use humor, but what I'm trying to do is get the exhales that recruits the parasympathetic system. And that actually has a calming, it can make a difference, right? Whatever you can do to influence. And, if money is a problem, that's a hard thing when you see, healthy foods. It's like, you see the price of foods. Yeah, right. I do, and totally respect that. So what can you do with the water? Anything you can do to get them using their legs, the muscles of their legs is regulating, and they won't even realize it. If you can get them to lift heavy stuff, move things, even anything standing on one leg, believe it or not, it can be helpful for the nervous system. Decluttering, even just a little corner, can really make a big difference. So all of these are working on reducing stressors in the biological domain, which is really, if you think about all of our senses, So we think about visual noise, and we think about auditory noise, the sounds that are part of it. So we think about all of the senses, but also there are other senses. There's the proprioception sense, which is, so looking at, that's when people often will have like a beanbag chair and these kinds of, comfy things that can really make a difference. So just anything that you can do to make that feel like your space. You're not turning it into a yoga studio. It has to fit you, right? So this is kind of a fun one. And even though they are watching the screen, what I really liked about this example of a parenting example was there's a history to it. You'll know the minute you see it. And I also noticed that the lack of clutter, if you will, and the connection. Dad doesn't have a phone or anything there, so it's just kind of a cute one, right?
Tale as old as time, true as it can be. Barely even.
So if you have older teenagers or kids that you're really struggling with and you're not feeling able to connect with them at all, the thing is, again, go back to that reframing. Okay, we have to recognize it's a real stressor on us. So it gobbles our energy when we can't soothe our kid, we can't reach our kid, and we just, nothing we do to try. And we're like at our wits' end. We're worried about what kind of, moral development, all of these things. We're worried about school. And it can be such a stressor on us. And when we begin to realize, okay, no, there's something more going on. And it doesn't mean there's a diagnosis. It could be, but it could just mean literally that the stress of the pandemic and lockdowns and changes, and added to that social media and, whatever changes that have happened in their lives, it's just more than their brain and bodies can keep up with. Like evolutionary wise, just imagine how much has changed in the last 2 decades. Right? And so our brain and bodies are designed for a different time. And so it's that compassion and finding it and starting there. And then any little moment, I have this acronym called WE time, which is 15 minutes connection with your kid with no phones. You're together, and it is no technology, and you could be just, hanging out on a couch, right? But something together that is just being with. And you might feel you don't have time. That those little connections are really what can make a big difference. Recognize anxiety when you see it. It's showing up in so many, and anxiety is not like, anxiety serves a purpose, right? And not all anxiety we're seeing is clinical or is needs to be diagnosed. Or some anxiety, feeling anxiety before you start a new job or whatever, is a little bit normal, right? It's a little bit of stress, but it's also building up in a positive way, can build up a bit of energy and readiness and things. But where the anxiety rates, the data on them is just through the roof. So recognizing it, because anxiety can mask just about anything from learning problems to different kinds of diagnoses. So there's all sorts of things that can show up, and it can show up in some of us as well.
Hey, welcome back. Today, I really wanted to think about what's the best way to teach teachers about trauma without getting them distracted with all the technical stuff, and what's the most important thing for them to understand and learn. And I thought that the best way to do it might be to just make a difference between a learning brain versus a brain in survival mode. So we'll just call it learning brain versus survival brain. And this is the difference. So learning brain is this brain that's open to learning new information, and it's completely okay with ambiguity and grays and vagueness, and it sees the big picture. It like pulls back and is on the balcony, can look over the forest and figure out what's going on. On an emotional level, people in learning brain feel calm, peaceful, maybe a little excited about what they're about to learn, maybe a little playful and having fun too, and definitely curious. And they're not afraid of making mistakes because it's just part of the learning process. And so they're not really thinking about themselves. And they actually feel a little bit of confidence that if they just apply themselves, they might pick up what they're trying to learn. Now, survival brain, on the other hand, is completely different. It's hyper-focused on threat. It doesn't like ambiguity. It wants clear, hard facts. It thinks in black and white terms. It doesn't want anything to be gray at all. And then emotionally, you can imagine that survival brain makes people feel panicky, feel like a little obsessive and afraid of getting things wrong. And they don't feel calm and open to learning new things. They just want to get things over with. And people in survival brain also really don't like making mistakes, and they are afraid of looking stupid too. So students in survival brain don't want to be picked on. They don't want to raise their hand and ask questions and look stupid. And so these people are also filled with doubt about their own ability to learn stuff, and they're afraid that other people can see how stupid they really are. Now, it's really important to understand how learning brain and survival brain interact, because survival brain always trumps learning brain. And it makes sense, because survival brain is just trying to save your life. And so if it thinks that there's something dangerous happening, you better pay attention to it, right? But the tricky thing is that as survival brain stays on longer and longer, it's harder to get out of that. And it's harder to really go into learning brain. And the way I think about it is kind of like the myth of Sisyphus. You know, that guy who has to push a rock up a hill, and then every day it falls back down and he has to do it over and over again. Well, being in learning brain is like being up on the high parts of that mountain. You can see the expanse of what's going on, but it also takes a lot of work to be up there. And at any second, if you're not paying attention and putting effort into it, it's so easy to slip back into survival brain again. And that rock that Sisyphus is trying to push up, well, that's kind of like stress. And the more stressed you feel, the heavier and bigger that rock gets, and it just pushes you back into survival brain quicker. Now, the kicker is that for traumatized people, stress is a really rigid and intense thing. And so with trauma, any little stress makes that rock grow way bigger than it normally would. And because people with trauma misperceive ambiguous situations as threatening and stressful, that rock just stays big all the time. Now, the good news is that the more you control stress, well, the easier it is to be in learning brain, right? Because that rock is a lot smaller. And what I really want to highlight for teachers is that the best way to keep students in learning brain goes back to why I spent so much time talking about attachment. Students best learn when they feel like they're safe and supported by the adults around them. So it's kind of like a baby elephant. You know how like on those nature shows, the baby elephant is like playing with leaves or exploring a tree or something like that and having a lot of fun. And the only reason why they can do that is because there's a whole group of mama elephants around that baby protecting it and looking out for danger. So a kid with trauma or who's stuck in survival brain, it's kind of like that baby elephant who doesn't have protective adults around them. They can't play and learn because they're way too focused looking out for threat and danger. So this is why I really believe that the most important thing that schools need to focus on, way more important than any kind of techniques or curricula, is really whether or not they are creating that environment where students feel like they're surrounded by these big mama elephants who are going to protect them and watch out for them and make them safe. And when students have that, I bet you it unlocks their curiosity, their eagerness to learn and play as a way to learn.
So it spoke to schools, but it applies to all of us. And, you know, really thinking about that, pushing the rock up the hill. And we talk about stress backpacks. To the parent who asked about their child, the situation, I think, if I recall, was 17 years old and sleeping a lot, diagnosis of, I believe it was anxiety and depression, and ADD, and sleeping a lot. Again, I'm not clinical, and so really follow the advice and seek out the supports on the clinical side of things. What I would suggest, so the question was about quality sleep. Lots of things. Look up the work of sleep, the language of sleep hygiene. So, you know, we are even affected by little red lights on in our rooms. It actually makes a difference in the quality of our sleep. Going to bed and, you know, and feeling okay when you're going to bed. The technology, all those things can have fresh sheets. You'd be surprised. You're like, I don't know what else to do. She won't let me. Free of fresh sheets, right? Anything that we can do can make a difference. But I'd also suggest that that the sleep may very well be necessary. When, you know, those diagnoses, there's an awful lot going on. And the stress could be part of the healing. So of course you don't want to stay in that spot for a really long time. We've got to think about, that's the example here. I'm hearing about a lot of people with kids that go into the room and aren't coming out. We should be worried about that. Right. But again, we can't thou shalt it. It has to be some compassion and understanding. Their stress system is saying no. Gabor Mate is a great book called When the Body Says No, right? And it can be shut down. And this could be different parts of the brain actually are a big part of it. It's a survival thing. So then we begin to think about what can we do? That's what I always do. Okay, what can I do? The little moments, right? The couple of minutes of a conversation, or sitting on a bed and telling a story. Every situation is different, but anything I can do to link. So the sleep is not necessarily a negative thing, but definitely look at sleep hygiene, and definitely, begin to think there's more than that. The medical and the medication can help. And none of us are anti-medication at all. I've used it myself sometimes and it's helped, but it's not the solution. It allows you to get into a space where then you can begin to work, beginning to find better routines, and the things that make a difference can really help. So helping people notice what does work for them is as part of the self-reg as much as anything. So these are some strategies in the cognitive domain. So cognitive stressors, like think about tax time, or trying to manage multi-step directions, or trying to remember. You're trying to learn something and study something and it just doesn't stick, right? All of those things can be tied to stressors in the cognitive domain. So just remember that the technology is a stress drain on the brain, right? So really being aware of that. If you've got young kids, one thing to keep in mind is that the programs that move really fast, way more energy draining on the brain, right? Predictable routines. That doesn't mean like stamped in cement and never changed, but there is a bit of a predictable routine, and that can help lighten the cognitive stress of having to always figure out things anew. Really recognize if you can spot when your kid or your students are in survival brain, that alone is the compassion. It's like, okay, this doesn't make sense. So there's something more going on. Using stories, so oral stories, I've got something on books later on and reading and how to, but oral stories, any kind of stories, telling things over and over again, recognizing that when young people are playing music over and over again, for example, why do they do that? It is actually soothing. It's recognizable. It's predictable. But it can actually be, an anchor. Laughter and play. So it might seem like a strange thing to put here, but how do we enter into new learning? Somebody thinks they're really struggling in learning anything new, or thinking clear, making problem solving, and yet I'm really interested in whatever it is. That's an opportunity. How can you? It's a strategy as an educator, but it also works as parents. How can you come around a child or a young person and give them opportunities to grow that, recognizing strengths? A kid, the mom that had hears from everybody that everything complaining about her kid. How nice would it be to hear, here's a strength of your child. So do that for your children too, right? Looking, and you might say there are none because it feels like that some days, but there are, right? This is an example of just playing a game around attention. So this self-reg is not just about well-being, it's also about focus and learning. And, you can use different kinds of strategies. This is just a fun one. I'm going to invite you to count the bears. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to pause it. There are a lot of bears, right? And so it's just an example of, certain games that you can play. Certain times you tell stories, things that get attention, that engage, any of those kinds of things. Someone is talking, has asked me about I've read all the questions, and there's a few that I will invite to email me, and I'll chat outside, but I have a bit about avoidance. So, often we talk about functions of the behavior, and there's these behaviorist assessments. For us, we we go further and we think, okay, why? So why avoidance? And avoidance is a terrific one that we don't want to just stop at, oh, avoid because they don't want to do it. But why? Really, why? And so then you can go back and unpack the stressors and begin to recognize what it is about that, and trying to work on some of the roots. So it takes some more digging, but avoidance is telling us something, and it's telling us about a need, and there's more. It's like dig in here, and sometimes sometimes it's more than they can handle. And you might say, well, they handled it fine last month. Yeah, but today it's more than they can handle. Boom, little bit, right? I wanted to show you this example of lending calm, and watch mom, because from my sense, she is calm, but she's working on it. I've got one to show you where it comes very naturally. So here's an example. Now, if you're saying I've got teenagers, it's the same process across the lifespan. It just looks different. It looks different for a teenager than it might with a senior, with a 2-year-old. But there's still the same need to be co-regulated by another, to be soothed, to know you're safe.
Hazel, hey, it's okay, I'm here. You're safe. Okay, when you're ready, I'm here to give you a hug, okay? I'm ready, Mom.
Notice that wasn't a punishment. That wasn't, you need to calm down and you get a hug. It's when you're ready, I'm here.
It's all right. You're safe. It's okay. I love you.
See? And so some of this is our practicing that. This is strategies in the calm domain. Somebody asked about soft eyes in one of the earlier questions. I'll have to go and find that. But so it is, the emotion domain, the biggest. We're not inviting kids to squash any emotion. There's no emotion that's not okay. We got to be careful with you're a big boy and these sort of messaging. Emotions serve a purpose. They happen to us. It's not something we choose. What we think about an emotion is a thought, but it's something that happens. So really making space for that. One of the biggest gifts is realizing that, a child is dysregulated. You can see a dysregulated stress system in front of you and have compassion for that. So there's just a couple of examples here. I talked to you about the exhales. I talked to you about this idea of routines, but also with flexibility. Imagine, this is something I do sometimes, is I try to imagine, okay, I'm trying to lower the other person's heart rate. What would I do? Okay, I'm not going to talk really fast. I'm going to talk slower. What are some of the things? So thinking like that. Shared reading time. There's all kinds of reasons for reading together that are really positive, real books that are interesting to both. But there's a huge social emotional element to just the being with, the connection, the time with the book. You got a kid that won't read, you want the kid to read to you, and it's not like fingers under words or any of those things. It read to them. Sometimes they'll be like, yeah, I don't want, can I read my book to you? And choose a book that is, that you might be interested in, but is, and sometimes they'll allow for that. All of these things can really, really help with feeling connected, but also finding themselves in stories can be a part of it as well. So here's a mom that's also lending the calm.
Can I help you? Can I give you a hug? I understand you're feeling so sad right now. Okay. See, you can cry. Yes, you can cry.
And just to recap, it's we take the 5 practices and we think, okay, reframe the behavior. This doesn't make sense. Nothing I'm doing is working. Why and why now? What more? What am I missing? And sometimes you can ask a kid, but usually it's just for reflecting. You don't have to come to the answer, but realizing there's something more going on. There's a dysregulated kiddo here, and there's something more going on. They're not trying to give me a hard time. They're having a hard time. Really recognizing the impact of too much stress. So it's not just that you're not strong enough or you don't have enough empathy or the kids or any of those things. There's something going on. and we reduce the stressors that we can. Then we really work on this, it's interoception, this sense of our own stress states. I feel calm right now, and usually calm, but I'm like, I can be a whirlwind, right? But recognizing that's not bad, but there's moments, how can I do it? And moving yourself in and out of the states is a big part of learning to self-regulate, learning to handle moving in and out of states. Sports games can do it, music, art experiences, going, doing something that's really scary, right? And then anchoring in every possible success that you can, really focusing on our listening, but are noticing our own states and keeping as calm as we can. And then restoring energy. It's one of the biggest gaps. And we start with trying to manage the behaviors when a child's brain body is running on empty. And what more can we do? This is energy-centered teaching. And it's 4 quadrants, and it's like, I don't know where to start. So you start with, okay, what is my child feeling? Am I seeing the signs that they feel safe emotionally, culturally, gender and sexuality, and all those different areas? And what more can I do? What more can I do? Connect. So you might say, well, we're connected, but do you feel that? And what more can you do? Honestly, those moments with technology away can make a big difference. Looking for strengths and naming them. And even if you're getting stare face, right, helping them see the strengths. And then stress detecting in the 5 domains can make a really big difference. So see a child differently, and you'll see a different child.